Returning to our top story this evening in the ongoing search for Nancy Guthrie, the Pima County Sheriff's Department says the suspect's clothes may have been purchased from Walmart, but they're not exclusively available at that store.
The FBI interrogated Nancy Guthrie's son-in-law, and what they found in that investigation cracked this entire case wide open. Nancy was 84 years old, a grandmother taken from her Tucson home by someone who had been watching her property for weeks before he acted. What did the FBI discover about him? And what was hidden on Nancy's roof that nobody in that neighborhood had noticed? Join us as we uncover everything the FBI discovered during their investigation. The last person to see her. Nancy Guthrie was not the kind of woman who disappeared. She had lived in the same home in Tucson's Catalina foothills for years, a secluded property on the mountainous northeast edge of the city, surrounded by thick desert vegetation and the kind of quiet that made her feel safe. She was 84, born January 27, 1942 in Fort Wright, Kentucky. She had a pacemaker, a heart condition, and daily medication she never missed. She had 3 adult children, a church group she logged into every Sunday morning, and a life built around the people she loved. She was a woman of routine, and someone had studied that routine carefully. On the evening of Saturday, January 31, 2026, she took an Uber to her daughter Annie's home, arriving at 5:32 p.m. The driver later confirmed to investigators that she was in good health. She spent the evening with Annie and Annie's husband, Tommaso Cioni, the kind of night she had shared with her daughters since they were children. At 9:48 p.m., her garage door opened at her own address. It closed 2 minutes later. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos said investigators assumed from that moment she was home and going to bed. She never logged into church the next morning. When a friend couldn't reach her and called the family, Annie and Cioni drove to the house and found what no daughter wants to find. Nancy's phone sitting on the counter, her wallet exactly where she always kept it, her heart medication untouched on the nightstand, and no sign of Nancy anywhere in the house. They called the sheriff at noon. Deputies arrived at 12:15 p.m. Within hours, the front porch gave investigators their first hard fact: blood. DNA testing later confirmed it belonged to Nancy. The first question in any abduction involving a family member is always the same one. The Sheriff's Department and the FBI both acknowledged it publicly. They looked at everyone close to Nancy, including the last person to see her. Cioni had driven her home that night. He was one of the last confirmed contacts before she vanished. Sheriff Nanos was careful. He said no one in the family was a suspect, but he also said no one had been ruled out. It meant investigators were still building the picture, still measuring everyone against the evidence, still asking who had access, who had motive, who knew her home. Cioni cooperated fully. The FBI confirmed it. He and Annie added security cameras to their own home during the investigation. Family insiders told reporters they believed an apology was owed to the couple for the speculation that had attached to them publicly. Nanos himself pushed back on media coverage he called nasty, saying investigators did not want to mark someone who could be completely innocent. The scrutiny around the family faded as the evidence began pointing somewhere else entirely, toward a man who had been to Nancy's property before the night she was taken, a man the family had never met, a man who left his DNA on a road 2 miles away. That interrogation of everyone close to Nancy proved something. Not in a single interview room, but across weeks of FBI questioning, financial review, phone record analysis, and surveillance cross-referencing. Every person close to her was examined. Phone records, bank accounts, movements, relationships, all of it was run down. The people who loved Nancy had nothing to hide. And that made the evidence pointing outward toward the stranger on that porch not just suspicious, but the only remaining explanation for what happened to her. The family was cleared. But what did the FBI find when they turned the cameras on Nancy's own front door? Man on the porch. At 1:47 in the morning on February 1st, the doorbell camera at the front of Nancy Guthrie's home went dark. not dead, but dark. The Google Nest device had been physically interfered with. Nancy did not have an active Nest subscription, which meant footage was not uploading to the cloud in real time. Whoever came to that door almost certainly knew that. What they did not know was that residual back-end data tied to the device persisted even after the camera was disabled and that the FBI would find it. 10 days after Nancy disappeared, FBI Director Kash Patel posted the recovered footage directly to his personal account on X. The video showed a masked man approaching Nancy's front door in the early hours of February 1. In one clip, he raised a gloved hand directly to the camera lens. In another, he walked off the porch, reached into Nancy's garden, pulled out a piece of shrubbery, and used it to try to cover the camera from a different angle. In a third image, he stood in the archway of the home with his head tilted down, apparently checking the angles himself, already aware that the camera might have a second field of view he had not accounted for. He was dressed in a full ski mask, long dark sleeves, dark pants, and black gloves. The FBI placed him at 5 feet 9 inches to 5 feet 10 inches tall, of average build. He carried a black backpack and a firearm in a holster positioned at the center of his waist, an unusual placement that security experts noted publicly as tactical rather than casual. He moved without hurrying. International security consultant Carl de la Guerra reviewed the footage and said the suspect's pace was the behavior of someone who had been to that location before. The backpack was a 25-liter Ozark Trail hiker pack sold exclusively at Walmart. The gun holster visible in the footage was a $10 model, also available at Walmart. Pima County Sheriff confirmed to CBS News that Walmart had been contacted and was cooperating, providing purchase records for both items, pulling transaction data across months and across locations, both inside and outside the Tucson area. The backpack was the first item of clothing positively identified by investigators, and Nanos called it one of the most promising leads in the case. At 2:12 a.m., motion detection software on a second camera at the property registered movement near the home. At 2:28 a.m., 16 minutes later, Nancy Guthrie's pacemaker disconnected from the monitoring app on her iPhone. Her phone stayed in the house, but the pacemaker left with her. The FBI now had a precise window. Nancy Guthrie was removed from her home at approximately 2:28 in the morning, and the man who took her had been standing on her porch more than 40 minutes earlier. Those 16 minutes between 2:12 and 2:28 were not dead time. A motion trigger confirms presence near a structure. It doesn't confirm what happened inside it. But the pacemaker disconnecting at 2:28 was something else entirely. Nancy's device had been continuously paired to her iPhone, transmitting heartbeat data to her cardiology monitoring service in real time. When that signal cut off, it meant one thing: Nancy was no longer within Bluetooth range of her phone. She was moving away from the house. She was already in his vehicle. Investigators had not just a window, they had an exit. Neighbors in the Catalina foothills later told News Nation that the FBI had knocked on their doors in early March, asking specifically about internet disruptions on the night of February 1st. At least one neighbor found that his Ring camera history from that night had an unexplained gap. Others reported similar outages. An antenna-like object was visible protruding from the suspect's pocket in the footage, consistent with a signal jammer, a device capable of killing Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity in a defined radius, which would explain both the camera failures and the precise darkness he moved through that night. He moved like he knew the house, and what he left behind 2 miles away told investigators exactly why. Blood, DNA, and a glove in the desert. The search for Nancy Guthrie covered terrain that was difficult by design. The Catalina Foothills neighborhood sat at the base of the Santa Catalina Mountains on the northeastern edge of Tucson, remote, vegetated, poorly lit, with limited camera infrastructure. Sheriff Nanos said publicly that in a standard city neighborhood, the route of anyone who took Nancy would have been captured on dozens of cameras. Out there, investigators were working in a landscape that offered almost nothing. They deployed dogs, drones, helicopters, infrared equipment, and ground teams in a widening pattern across the surrounding desert. One of the most significant finds came from roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home. Searchers recovered a single black glove on the side of a road near an open field. The FBI said it appeared visually consistent with the gloves worn by the suspect in the Nest camera footage. Of the 16 gloves collected during the broader search, most belonged to search team members who had discarded them in the field. This one was handled differently. It was packaged separately, sent overnight on February 12th to a private forensic laboratory in Florida, and the FBI received preliminary results by February 14th. The lab extracted a DNA profile from an unknown male. The profile was submitted to CODIS, the combined DNA index system maintained by the FBI, which, as of November 2025, held over 19.2 million offender profiles, 6.1 million arrestee profiles, and 1.4 million forensic samples, and had assisted in more than 758,000 investigations. The result came back with no match. The man whose DNA was on that glove had no prior record that required a DNA sample. He had never entered the system. He was unknown. Inside Nancy's home, investigators recovered additional DNA. It did not belong to Nancy. It did not match anyone in her immediate family. It also returned no hits from CODIS. Sheriff Nanos confirmed in a March 2026 interview with NBC News that the DNA from the glove and the DNA from inside the property were different from each other, 2 separate unknown profiles from 2 separate locations. Retired FBI agent Maureen O'Connell said publicly that this raised the serious possibility of more than one perpetrator. She added that if co-conspirators were involved, the $1 million family reward created enormous pressure between them, because that kind of money changes the calculus of loyalty very fast. With CODIS eliminated, investigators opened a second track: investigative genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer in 2018 after decades of dead ends, and that placed Brian Kohberger at the Idaho murder scene in 2022. The process works by running a forensic DNA sample against the voluntary databases of consumer ancestry services like Ancestry.com, which holds profiles from tens of millions of users. Even if the suspect had never submitted his own DNA, a biological relative could provide a path to his identity. Investigators confirmed the process was underway. A neighbor named Laura Gargano added another thread. Watching aerial news footage of Nancy's home, she noticed the roof looked unusually white and clean, despite recent heavy rains that darkened rooftops across the area. She contacted the FBI. Investigators inspected the roof and removed what appeared to be a wired camera device that had been installed there, a camera that, if operational, would have given whoever placed it a direct view of Nancy's property, her comings and goings, and the layout of her home from above. A wired device does not get installed in an hour. It requires physical access to the roof, knowledge of the structure, and a direct connection to a power source. That meant someone had been on Nancy Guthrie's roof at some point before January 31st. The 2 documented visits captured in the doorbell footage were no longer the beginning of the planning timeline. They were the end of it. Investigators now had to consider that surveillance of Nancy's home had begun weeks, possibly months, earlier than anyone had assumed. Every neighbor's memory of anything unusual, an unfamiliar vehicle parked too long, an unrecognized work crew, a man on a ladder, became a potential data point. The FBI expanded its canvas accordingly. A ring camera on a property 2.5 miles away captured a vehicle speeding past at 2:36 a.m., 8 minutes after the pacemaker disconnected. Investigators confirmed they were tracking it. The DNA had no name, but the ransom notes that started arriving 3 days later gave investigators something they hadn't expected: the ransom. 3 days after Nancy Guthrie was reported missing, a letter arrived at KOLD-TV, a CBS affiliate in Tucson. It demanded payment for Nancy's release. It contained specific details about her home and what she had been wearing the night she disappeared. information the FBI classified as sensitive enough to request that the station not publish. Investigators treated it as legitimate. Over the following days, additional letters arrived at KGUN9, TMZ, and CNN affiliates. The kidnappers had chosen not to contact the family directly. They had gone to the press. The notes demanded Bitcoin. TMZ confirmed the wallet address listed in the first note was real and verifiable on the blockchain. K-Gun reported one demand of $4 million with a hard deadline of 5 p.m. on February 5th. A second escalation brought the figure to $6 million by February 9th. The note sent to KGUN included an explicit threat to Nancy's life if the deadline passed without payment. February 5th came. No payment was confirmed. The deadline passed. Then the second one. The kidnappers went quiet. No follow-up contact was confirmed. Savannah Guthrie posted a video to Instagram with her siblings, Cameron and Annie. She said plainly that the family would pay. Cameron addressed whoever held their mother directly, asking for contact and proof of life. Savannah described Nancy's health publicly: limited mobility, a fragile heart, and daily medication she had not had since the night she was taken. The FBI advised the family that any ransom decision was theirs alone to make. In a separate Instagram post, Savannah asked the people holding her mother to remember that Nancy was someone's mother, someone's grandmother, that she was a person, not leverage. On February 10th, the same day Kash Patel posted the doorbell camera footage, a Bitcoin transaction of $152 was recorded to the Ransom wallet. The amount was far below any ransom figure, and its purpose was unclear. But blockchain forensic specialists noted it created a traceable entry point on a public ledger. Bezalel Eithun-Raviv, CEO of Lionsgate Network, told the New York Post the transaction could lead investigators to the wallet's controller through exchange records, IP address data, and transaction pattern analysis. Cryptocurrency is pseudonymous, not anonymous, and the FBI had used blockchain forensics to build successful federal convictions before. A second note arrived at KOLD on a Friday, containing operational details about the case and no deadline. An anchor described its tone as markedly different from the first. A third message arrived at TMZ demanding 1 Bitcoin, worth approximately $66,000 at the time, not as ransom, but as payment in exchange for the name of the kidnapper. The framing of that note suggested a third party, not the person holding Nancy. One former FBI agent told the New York Post that the consistent use of US dollars rather than dollars across multiple notes was unusual for a domestic writer, a possible indicator of foreign origin or deliberate stylistic misdirection. A Los Angeles man named Derek Colella was separately arrested and charged with sending fraudulent ransom texts directly to the Guthrie family. Authorities confirmed his messages had no connection to the actual abduction. Former FBI Special Agent Robin Dreeke told the Hidden Killers podcast the investigation was being flooded with noise, scammers, attention seekers, and copycat fraudsters, all creating interference that had to be separated from the genuine trail. The FBI's tip line and the sheriff's line had received over 40,000 calls combined. Every one of them had to be assessed. The volume alone was a tactic, whether the kidnappers intended it that way or not. The ransom trail pointed outward, but the surveillance footage pointed at a man who had been to Nancy's house before the night she was taken. Who was he? The suspect, the FBI was hunting. When Kash Patel posted the doorbell footage on February 10th, something shifted. Retired FBI Special Agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told Newsweek the case was red hot. Up to 100 agents and analysts assigned, more resources than most kidnapping investigations received this early. She said the man on that porch was highly identifiable, even through a ski mask. She pointed specifically to his visible eyebrows, the trace of a mustache above the mask, a pinky ring on his right hand, and the particular way he moved and held his body on the property. Someone who knew this man, she said, would recognize him in that footage. A CNN source provided a detail that reframed the timeline entirely. One of the still images released by the FBI alongside the video appeared to have been captured on a separate day from the doorbell footage. The suspect in that image had no backpack and no holster. If accurate, the man had visited Nancy Guthrie's home on at least 2 occasions before the night he took her. He came once to learn the layout. He came again to act on it. That explained the camera angles he already knew, the shrubbery he went straight for, and the confidence with which he moved through a property that wasn't his. The pacemaker gave investigators a tool that most kidnapping cases never have. The FBI contacted the team behind a portable Bluetooth tracking device, a signal sniffer designed to detect low-power electronic signals, including the pings sent by pacemakers. Nancy's specific model sent a Bluetooth signal to a paired iPhone every 1 to 3 minutes. The device's creator described it as the best possible type for aerial search. The FBI mounted the signal sniffer on the skid of a Pima County Sheriff's helicopter, which flew slow, low passes over the Catalina foothills and surrounding desert. The Sheriff's Department confirmed the technology was deployed and declined to say whether it had produced a result. Hours after the footage went public on February 10th, a man was pulled over in Rio Rico, Arizona, 60 miles south of Tucson, close to the Mexican border. The FBI and the Sheriff's Department executed a simultaneous search warrant on his home and vehicle. He identified himself as Carlos, a delivery driver who worked routes in Tucson. He told reporters after his release that law enforcement had been following his vehicle before the stop, and that both the property and car searches found nothing connecting him to the case. He was cleared and released on February 11th. Sheriff Nanos confirmed publicly that he was not involved. A second operation followed on February 13th. Investigators moved on to a residence a short distance from Nancy's property, the first search targeting an address with no family connection to the case. 2 people were removed from the address. Roads surrounding the area were closed to the public for 4 hours. 1 person was questioned and released the next day. Investigators simultaneously seized a gray Range Rover from the parking lot of a nearby Culver's restaurant, not through a tip or a witness identification, but through license plate reader data. The Pima County Sheriff's Department had been running plate records against known traffic patterns in the Catalina foothills in the weeks before the abduction, cross-referencing vehicles that appeared in the area on multiple occasions without an obvious residential connection. The Range Rover had surfaced in that data. Neither search produced an arrest, but the speed of both the February 13th operation and the February 10th Rio Rico stop confirmed the tip line was returning actionable intelligence, not just volume. FBI agents were still canvassing the street directly west of Nancy's home as late as early March, knocking on doors, pulling camera footage, asking about cars and strangers and anything unusual in the days before January 31st. By March 5th, Sheriff Nanos told NBC News that investigators were definitively closer to naming a suspect. A formal task force had been assembled, 4 homicide detectives and a sergeant working full-time alongside FBI agents out of the Bureau's Tucson field office. The presumption driving every decision was that Nancy Guthrie was still alive. The combined reward stood at $1,100,000. $100,000 from law enforcement, $1 million from the Guthrie family. Nanos told the New York Times they would not stop until Nancy came home. The task force was closing in, but what did everything the FBI had built actually prove about who took her and why? What this evidence means for Nancy. 35 days in, and the investigation had done something remarkable. It had narrowed a case with no witnesses, no indoor security footage, and no surviving camera trail down to a man the FBI could describe in physical detail, trace through purchase records at a national retailer, and track through a biological profile moving through one of the most powerful forensic databases ever built. The leads were real, they were active, and they were closing in. And every person who has watched that doorbell footage is a potential path to identifying him. Coffindaffer was right when she said someone who knows this man would recognize him, not because his face is visible, because his behavior is. The way he moved on that porch, unhurried, methodical, already intimate with a property that wasn't his, was precisely what she described. Behavior that anyone who knew him would recognize, even through a mask. The genealogy database is working. The blockchain trail is live. The Walmart purchase records are in the FBI's hands. $1 million reward is sitting between at least two men who share a secret. And former investigators noted that figure is larger than most co-conspiracies can survive. Co-conspiracies don't hold. Not under this kind of scrutiny, not with this kind of money on the table. On March 2, 2026, Savannah, Annie, and Tommaso Cioni returned to Nancy's home together for the first time since the night she was taken. They placed flowers at the memorial that had been built outside the house and left a handwritten card. Savannah returned to Studio 1A at Rockefeller Center on March 5th, walking back onto the Today set 33 days after she had left it to search for her mother. She told her colleagues she came back when the time felt right. She did not say the search was over, because it wasn't. Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She carries a framed photo of her grandchildren in her purse everywhere she goes. Whoever has her knows exactly who she is, exactly how fragile her heart is, exactly how many days she has gone without medication. And so does every FBI agent working this case, every analyst running that DNA profile, every forensic specialist watching that blockchain, every investigator knocking on doors in the Catalina foothills in the early hours of a March morning, all of them working toward one outcome: bringing Nancy home. The suspect visited Nancy's house before the night he took her. What do you think he was looking for during that first visit? 2 unknown DNA profiles, a $1 million reward, and a blockchain trail the FBI is actively following. Which of these do you think breaks this case first? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.